Welcome to Python for Data 1 Unit 5, working with files. So in this one, what we're going to do is we're going to open files, close files, read, write files, just a lot of stuff with files. We're also going to see how to connect to a local host and just some basic SQL that you can run with inside of Python. This is in no way meant to be a full-blown data engineering course with pipelines, etc. This is just an intro into playing around with files. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. First thing that we want is we probably want to take a look at our operating system and see where our current working directory is. The reason why we want to know this is when we're writing files, we want to know, hey, where are they actually going? So we can go ahead and bring in our operating system library, and then we're going to bring our method in as an attribute of that and run this. So we go ahead and run this, and we can see this is my current user path. So if I write a file, this is where my file is going to be written to. Let's say we want to change that file. What we're going to need to do is we're going to need to go into a library called pathlib and import something called path. Now what path does is it essentially will allow us to pass an argument into the change directory. So we're going to take path, which is here. This is just an object that's being loaded from essentially this little piece of code behind the scenes that takes this string and says this is actually a location. Let's take that location, load it into path. We're going to load this into change directory, and voila, we'll be changing our directory. Now you might be pausing for a second going, how did you know about pathlib and how did you know about path? Well, it comes from taking several classes, and whether they're online or in person. I believe this one was from a data science course that I took with Jim Byers. It was an intro to Python. I was like, hey, this is great. So I kind of stripped that and put this into my workbook. And that's what I'm constantly doing. Whether you go into Code Academy or you're going through Udacity or Coursera or Lynda or Zybooks or Zed Shaw's Learn Python the Hard Way or Automate Everything with Python, on and on and on, right? As you're going through and you're finding things that you're like, I find this valuable, I would strip those things out of those books, put it into a cookbook for yourself. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm sharing my own cookbook in the form of a training class. So this is how I knew this. Oh, and also, Google, Stack Overflow, YouTube, it goes on and on. And for me, what I would say as somebody who's developing and programming, you're going to have more questions and answers. And the format would be first, make sure to take more than just this class. Second, review your notes to see if it's in your notes. Third, go out and search online to see if you can find the answer, python.org. If you're just getting stuck, that's when you'd probably reach out to a coworker. And it shouldn't be like you wait like 90 days to reach out to a coworker who may be pretty savvy with Python. But on the same accord, you don't want to flip it and just be reaching out to coworkers or peers before you've done a little bit of research. Let's go ahead and run this. And of course, this is actually going to kick us out, I believe. Oh, right. I'm changing the directory to the directories, and I got kind of sidetracked with a little bit too much information there. So if we go in and we say, hey, let's go ahead and put in a new path that we want. And by the way, this is allowing me to escape. So, I've got a backslash and I'm escaping it, so it'll actually recognize it. So if we go in here and we say, let's just go ahead and put this into something like documents, Python scripts. Go ahead and run this. We should get an error message. It's funny, I keep my fingers crossed for an error message sometimes in this class. So this error message is saying, hey, this doesn't exist. And the point here is that using a change directory won't automatically create it if it doesn't exist. We have to go down and actually make the directory, and that's what we can do here with an mkdir for making the directory. You don't really have to import a lot. We're just using the os.mkdir and passing in the directory name. The directory name here, notice I'm not actually using double backslashes. And let's change this to scripts. You might already see where there is an issue. So we're going to go ahead and run this. Cannot find the specified path. You might think, okay, well, you need to put the backslashes in. And this is a part of troubleshooting and messing around with the code. Some of it you could look everything up, and some of it just try a couple of things, see if it works. All right, is this going to work? No. Okay, so it doesn't like the backslashes. What's going on? What's going on here is a pretty common error when you have like a desktop and you have a laptop, and you think that your root directories are the same, and sometimes they are not. So this is my default on my desktop, this is my laptop, and I didn't catch this before, so what I need to do is actually take this out. Try running it again. That should solve all issues, right? No, it doesn't like the double backslash. It likes it for path when it's taking the string and interpreting it into a location, but for whatever reason it doesn't like it for make directory. So now it works. All right, hooray. What we should see is, well, just so you know I'm not fibbing, look at the time down here, these match up. This was just written here and there's nothing in it. All right, and so that's a little bit with making directories. What I'd like you to do for this exercise coming up, I didn't put it in here, but I'd like you to decide where you want to put some of your Python scripts. Maybe you already have a location where you're loading in some of the work that you're doing on your exercises in the previous classes. Maybe you want to put it somewhere else, but take a minute, figure out where you want to put the scripts. You can go ahead and use Windows Explorer for that. Just don't create anything using Windows Explorer. This is, after all, Python class. I want you to use all of this to navigate around, get to your directories, actually put your Python scripts in there, change your directories. So if we look at our current working directory, oh, I forgot to go back. So I changed it, got my error because it didn't exist. I created it, but I forgot to change it. So let's go back here and change it. And caught myself there. It's good. All right, so now I'm banging on all cylinders, and this is what we want. We want you to create where you're going to put your scripts and change the directory to that. You might run into some issues where you want to delete, rename, do other things with your directory. This is where I'm going to ask you to go into Google, python.org, and just start figuring out how to research through some of the documentation. Maybe even just, if you like to pop into YouTube, go in there and just say, hey, how do you delete something in Python? I'm sure you're going to see 500 people talking about it. So go ahead and pause now and set up your directory where you're going to store your scripts. We're going to take a look at kind of creating some files, writing files, and removing files from a directory. The first thing that I'm showing you here is to list what's in the directory. Again, we just created this, so there shouldn't be anything in here. Let's go ahead and run this guy. And yep, we've got nothing in the current directory. One of the common errors with certain things like list directory, make directory, is forgetting to bring in the library. So if we run this, we'll get this kind of an error, listdir is not found. And it can be frustrating. You're like, wait a second, did I spell it right? You know, kind of a thing. And really what it's wanting is it's wanting the library to be, this to be an attribute of that. So we go ahead and run this. And now it should run just fine. Nothing's in there. So next up, we're going to go ahead and create a file. As you saw, there's no files in here, nothing up my sleeve. So we're going to take this new file .csv and we're going to open it, but it doesn't currently exist. So what this does, this little plus here says, hey, if it doesn't exist, create it. And the W says we're going to use this file to do some writing. So we're going to take this file, we're going to write to it. If it doesn't exist, we're going to go ahead and create it. We're opening it and loading this into this object A. Then down here, we're going to write a line into A using the write function. And so it's going to be loading it, this line into this file here. And then we're going to close the file out. But first up, let's just do this first step because I want to show you a couple of things. So there it is. It showed up. One of the things to be aware of is it's now open. It's open in Python, so this is going to give me a read-only error, or that it's locked by another user. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Nothing written in this file. Kind of backwards and forwards. If you have it open over here in Windows, or whatever operating system you're on, you may not be able to open it in Python. So just keep that in mind. If it is open, you might have some issues on one side of the house or the other. So with it open in Python, let's go ahead and write a line to the doc. And we're going to close the file out. Let's go ahead and take this and open it. We got first line in my doc, so it has been written. One of the things with close and open is when you're done with something, almost immediately just close it out. Don't wait to close it. It's easy to forget, and then you end up with errors. Coming down here, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to read this file because we don't want to be going into Windows. That's, the whole point is to automate. So what we can do in Python is we can open the new file.csv, and we can use this R for just reading. And we're going to load this file into an object called B. And with B, we have this attribute that we can use, or this little function here called read lines. Use this to read the lines and then load it into lines. And then we're going to close the file out, and then we're going to print lines. So again, reading it backwards, we're going to print lines. What is lines? Lines is here. Where is this coming from? Well, it's reading lines. Where is it reading lines? It's reading it from B. What's in B? It's this new file here. So let's go ahead and run this. First line of my doc. So it's actually opening up the CSV and reading it. Notice I'm closing the file out too as soon as I'm done using it. Now, next up, we can go ahead and remove the file. This is a pretty handy one. You might have already seen this when you were going and Googling around. But before we do that, let's go and do our list directory, see if it's showing up now. Oh, it is right there. Awesome. Let's go ahead and remove it. Oh, it's being used by another process. So let's make sure we have it all closed out and try it again. Being used by another process. Do I have it open? Oh, there it is. I have it open. So let's go ahead and try to remove it now. There we go. It is removed. Let's list it to see and prove that yes, indeed, I have removed it. So with that, we're going to jump into with statements. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the with statement. This allows us to open, execute, and close a file fairly automatically. There's still a value in some of the manual processes that I showed up here, but this is more of an automatic approach. So we're just going to kick it off using with, and then what we've already seen so far as like opening a file, we're going to write to it, actually create it if it doesn't exist. The only difference here is instead of having an equals and going into a B or equals and going into A, we're just going to say as T or whatever we want. We can call this anything. This is essentially our identifier over here. So it's going to open this and essentially load it into T. Down here, what we have is some local variables that we're creating here. So I'm loading line 1. This could be anything, and this could be anything, but I'm just deciding to call these all out what they are. So line 1 is going to be loaded into a line 1 variable, line 2 into 2, 3 into 3, so on and so forth. And now when I go to write, I'm taking this line 1 and I'm deciding to write it to the multiline.csv. So this is this write right here. And I'm bringing this in to write to it. Next thing that we have is a carriage return, which is identified by the backslash in the N, and we're writing that carriage return there. And essentially what this is going to do is like in Excel, it's going to go down to the next record or the next row. And then we're going to write line 2, carriage return. We're writing carriage return. Line 3, carriage return. Then we're going to close the file out. So let's go ahead and run this whole thing. All right, now going down here, we're going to go back to that manual process of opening and closing. Yes, it does have a value. So we're going to open and read this into A. And then we're going to read the lines into B. And then we're going to close A out, because we're done using A. And now we can go ahead and print B out and put a little print in there. Here we go. We see line 1, line 2, line 3. It looks like not so useful here, but it is important to print this off so you can kind of see, oh, these are carriage returns. So if you're ever in and looking at any kind of output and you're seeing these are carriage returns. If we go into the doc, we see it's been created. And holy cow, if it didn't actually put it into each of these different records. So what the result should look like. So one of the things that I'm calling out here is you can actually use commas in order to put in new fields. So if we wanted to go in here and say comma for comma blue, like maybe a comma red, something like that, we could definitely do this. So if we run this, oh, I have it open. We'll run this first just to be on the safe side, and then we'll run this. Comes out. Let's see what it looks like. Nice. It's writing to these other, it's essentially tabbing over, if you will. And why is it doing that? Because it's a comma separated file. So CSV likes the commas, and it's going to put those in, separate them, and put them into separate cells. So nice little trick right there. So I'd like you to do for this exercise, I'd like you to create a file with names of friends and family, actors, fictional characters, column for the first name, last name, age, and notes. And I'd like you to write those to a file that you don't create using any Windows functions. Do all of this in Python. So go ahead and pause the video and try that now. Okay, next up we're gonna do a little append, and I realize some of my comments in here are a little messy. I could probably clean some of these up. What we have here is we're gonna take that multi-line doc that we've created, and we're gonna use the A to append. So we have this A plus to append, and what we're going to append is gonna be down in this write. So we're gonna write append test, and we're gonna do another comma separate. We're gonna close and print it out. So let's go ahead and run this. Permission denied. Why? Because I have it open. See how easy that is to do? All right, so let's go ahead and run this again. And voila, it is appended down at the bottom. So for your next exercise, what I would like you to do is reopen your name file and add a new name to the file. So go ahead and pause the video and do that now. Okay, might be getting a little bit excited now and saying, oh, you know, I could actually use this for my Python skill builder. I could write all of my skills to a file, and you are correct. You could even create a file that's an answer key, read that in to do an if then else to see if, you know, to grade essentially your own questions that you're creating. I'd start off with true, false, multiple choice. Fill in the blanks a little bit rough, but you can start off there to start building out your quiz for sure. When you're looking at this, you go, well, what about doing like aggregations or iterating? Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm going to show you this here. So in this one, we're going to show you how to iterate. Hopefully this is feeling pretty comfortable up here with what's going on. If not, maybe just pause for a second, go back and take another review. And what we're doing now is instead of hard coding, we're going to create some inputs for sales weeks, and numbers can be entered into here. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to write these to separate lines with carriage returns. We're going to close this out. Then we're going to open this up. We're going to read it, and we're going to see that everything wrote. So let's just go ahead and do this first. So I don't know. Let's say we have a lemonade stand, so it's $20 that we made. Or, you know, we're putting 20 as millions. So, and then we've got like maybe 10, and then we've got like, I don't know, 27. All right, so did all of that actually work? So let's go ahead and do a print, and then B. This is getting ugly. I gotta move this down here. So let's go ahead and run this. Sure enough, it wrote 20, 10, 27. Okay, so we have this in an Excel spreadsheet. No doubt. There it is. There it isn't. There it is. Okay. Let's close this, and let's close this guy too. And next we want to iterate over all of this that we've written in there, that 20, that 10, and that 27 to get an average. So in order to do this, we're going to have to do something called a loop. This is not the section on loops, so if this is your first time through, it may be a little confusing. If it's your second time through, this might be a little bit more of a refresher. So here we've got a total that we're setting to 0. We've got a for statement, which kicks off a loop. We've got ln for lines. And we got this object B here, which is essentially holding all of our numbers. So we've got, this is empty, this is filled with information. So we're going to kind of read it backward and say for everything in this, we're going to do something. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what's in lines, we're going to convert it into an integer, and then we're going to add it to the total. So this first 20 that we have here is going to be added to the total. Well, first it's going to be converted into an integer because, hey, you can see up here it's not an integer. And you might ask, well, why wouldn't you make it an integer up here first? And it's because it doesn't like it for whatever reason. Anyways, we're going to convert this to an integer. So we now have 20 in the total, and that's going to be loaded into this lines, and we're going to kick it off again, and we're going to go in and say, okay, so we've got the next one is a 10. So we're going to add that to the 20. So now that goes into here. We'll have 30. We're going to take 27. We're going to add that. And so now we should have about 57 in here. And then it kicks us out of the loop, and we're going to come down here and we're going to say, okay, well, we're going to take the total divided by the length of b. So len, remember, is a string function. It's going to go in though and actually take a b and say, okay, so what's the length? How long is b? And it's really 3 records. So it's going to take this total that we put together of 57 and divide it by 3 and put that into the average. And then we've got a little print statement here. So if we run this, there we go, 19 is the average total. So that's how we can start getting into some aggregates. And I realized that was pretty quick and I probably missed a couple of things, but that's your general idea of a loop and a general idea of iterating through. One of the reasons why I'm bringing this in right now is because you're probably pretty excited to start doing something like this, but I would encourage you to maybe play around with just writing to files and reading from files before you get into aggregates until at least you've finished the loop section. All right, next up, we're going to use the shell utility. So I like to call it shuttle. I think of a airport shuttle. It's taking something from a source and moving it to a destination. In this scenario here, what we're going to do, and I'll do this manually so you can see what this is going to pull off, is we're going to first create something called data, and then we're going to move this into the data folder. So let's go ahead and take this back out. And we'll delete this and do it the Python way. All right, so down here, I'm going to import my OS. I'm going to make sure that my shell utility is imported. Then down here, what I'm going to do is take where the file is located and actually load it into an object called file. Take where I want it to go and put it into an object called folder. Again, these could be named anything. Then in the shell utility, I'm going to move the file to the folder. So as I'm looking at this, I want to call out this little nugget right here. So let's bring this up here. First thing I have to do is actually make a directory. And we did this before up here. We made a directory for Python scripts. Now we're going to make another directory under Python scripts for data. And it looks pretty much exact like what we had up there above. So notice this is in here now. The reason why I want to call this out is, yeah, it would go up here. It'd probably be a function. If you're going to be doing this a couple of times, why not automate it so you don't have to keep typing it over and over again or remembering what to type? You could actually turn this into a function and then pass the arguments into it so that you're not always having to remember how to do this. And that's what you want to look for in your programming, is things that you can automate. So this has now been created. So let's go ahead and remember what's happening here. We're taking this, loading into the file. We're taking this location, which is our new directory that we created, putting that into folder, and we're saying, okay, we're going to take whatever's in file and move it into the folder, source to destination. And we can take a look over here. We can see that it worked. So the exercise I have for you, you can go out and get the Titanic data set from go out to Google, go to KD Nuggets. Titanic's everywhere, and there's different versions of it. You can just find one that suits you, download that, and take it from your download file and put it into a data folder or wherever you want to store all of your data. You don't have to use Titanic. It's just if you're interested in data science, it's a really good gateway into data science. You can use anything you want. Take some files and practice moving them from one area to another. So go ahead and pause the video and work on that now. Okay, we have a lot of additional exercises. I'm not going to read through all these because it'll be like I'm reading a dictionary. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of scroll where you can pause and you can work through these. There's a little bit of verbiage in here to kind of get you through what these are. These are good exercises and drills to practice what you've learned. So I'm just going to go ahead and pause for a second and let you take a look at this, and then I'll scroll. And this should be around the bottom of those drills. Yeah, it is. So you can take a look at this. And then finally, you have the project exercise. There's a lot that you have in here now where you can actually write to a file, you can read from a file, And like I mentioned before, this is a great place where you can start creating keys, you can start logging your skills, you could start keeping a history, you could start thinking of it as here's an input screen for a customer, and how would I have them input and not overwrite and actually create new lines. This is where it gets really interesting. All right, last but definitely not least, we're going to be taking a look at bringing some files in, CSVs, connecting to a local host. There's going to be some things in here that look a little bit unfamiliar. Maybe you've heard of pandas before. We're not covering pandas in this class, but as you can see, we're going to be doing it in Python for Data 3, which will be available later. So this is, again, just kind of fundamentals. Coming down here, what we're going to do is we're going to use our OS. We're going to be using pandas. One thing I can say is you can take these libraries and give them an alias. Here I'm giving an alias of PD. That way I don't have to spell pandas out all the time. You'll see me do this sometimes, sometimes I don't. This is pretty universal though. Everybody pretty much takes pandas, turns it into PD, and then I'm calling pandas here and then bringing in a module from there that I can read CSVs from. So this allows me to read a CSV from my desktop, which is Iowa Liquor Sales Database. So we bring this in and we can see, hey, we're reading it. It's pretty awesome. Coming down here, this is a stretch if you want to kind of go through this. I have not covered this. This is covered in class 3 as well, Python for Data 3. It's kind of interesting that I've chosen to go fundamentals, intermediate, and advanced with the names because that is subjective. You know, it's just for the sake of organization and categorization. For a good example, try and accept may not be an advanced feature, but I didn't really have anywhere else to put it. And I want to kind of get you on the road and get you going at least within the first class. So I crammed as much as I could in and just made some choices. All right, having said that, here we can create different folders in this function here, and if you want to and you want to stretch and kind of go ahead, you can Google and look around and go onto Stack Overflow, python.org, figure out how to use try and accept as well. So I'll let you kind of take a look at that. Here, this is how you can actually create a folder within this directory that you're automatically creating. Down here's probably the fun part. Got a little misspell here. All right, so in this one, there's a couple of different programs that you can use, or different pieces of code that you can bring in to use to connect to databases. This G2 is pretty popular for connecting to a Postgres database. In some instances, you may be working in an org or whatever where they don't want using that, they want using Pygre SQL. So I'm showing you the different ways that you can install this because not everything is native and inherent in Python. You have to bring some things in and install them. You can do that using the conda installer, and in some cases you may need to install pip first, which helps you do installations, and then you can run pip to install. So for this, I have my G2 currently installed. I have a conflict in my versioning, so you will want to make sure that you have the right version of Python. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to be using G2 to use what's built in there to do my SQL connection. So I'm importing that, I'm importing system functions, I'm importing print, and in pandas as well. And here, I'm taking this string that is essentially what my configuration would be if I wanted to connect, not even using Python, just wanting to connect to my database. I would probably need to know the name of the host, the database name I'm connecting to, my username, and my password. So we run that. This is all loaded into the connection string. So we're going to take the connection string here, we're going to load it into this function called connect, which allows us to connect to this host using G2, and we're going to throw this all into this object called conn for connect. And then down here we're going to take connect and actually bring in the cursor, so it'll bring in where the cursor object is and help with performing our query. So if we take this, put that into cursor, and then we can print this out if we're connected. Yay, connected. So let's go ahead and go down here, and actually we could probably turn this all into a definition. So that'd be a good exercise, is saying, hey, how can I turn this into a function so I don't have to do all this jazz. And then down here, I'm actually able to use pandas. I'm going to read an SQL query. I'm currently connected to this database. I happen to know some of the tables that are in here, so I'm going to just do a pretty basic one. We'll run this. And we're getting data back from an SQL database. So I'll let your imagination go wild now with everything that you've learned in SQL. Yes, there is a ton more in here, and this is a tease. So you can Google around, you can look for more things while you're waiting for these classes to be published, or if you just want to know right now and you want to stop and you want to start learning how to do more with pandas, feel free to do that. There's a ton of information on there. What I want you to think about is, okay, if you are very savvy with SQL, you know that you can do inserts, you can create tables, you can insert information into those tables. So how would you create a user interface, a GUI user interface, where the customer could interact with inputs that they then submit to a insert within a table on your database, and then you could read from that to have that present back out to the screen. You may or may not at this point have all of the tools you would need in order to do that, but you're definitely close. It's just a matter of designing how would you actually do this? How would you connect to a database, create a table, and then do updates to that table and add records to it using Python as the customer-facing tool for their inputs, and have that write to a table, and then actually read from that table so the customer can see it after they've inputted their values. That's a really complex and difficult stretch at this point, but it's not necessarily impossible. All right, thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next unit.